This afternoon, we're taking a live look at the Texas State Capitol, where people are meeting right now to pay their respects to Sylvester Turner. The Houston Democrats' body is lying in honor there today and tomorrow. Turner held several titles before his death, including U.S. Congressman, Mayor of Houston, and State Representative for almost 3 decades.
We know so many people will be heading there to pay their respects today. We're working to get you a live picture from inside the Capitol, but we know it has been a busy week there at the Capitol building. Hundreds of people spent hours and hours waiting to voice their opinions about a bill that would direct taxpayer dollars towards private school tuition. So we want to bring in 2 former state lawmakers today. Dennis Bonnen, former House Speaker who represented Southeast Texas, and Mark Strama, Democratic representative for the Austin area, for a bit of context. So welcome back to both of you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Lots of people had their eyes on that marathon hearing on education savings accounts. It lasted almost 22 hours, really ending into the next day. I know you all are familiar with long nights at the Capitol. It's not necessarily new, but give us some context about why do it this way. Is there, has there been discussions about breaking that into several days? Why have these kind of marathon hearings?
The biggest reason is that when you post a hearing 5 days out, you give the public notice. And so what you're doing is if you cut it off, and let's say we all 4 show up, well, which 4 of us get to testify that day and then have to go home and come back another day? So the real reason they're marathons is to ensure that everyone from the public who shows up with the intention of being heard, they get heard. That's the real purpose. You don't want to have people traveling to town and then being told, oh, sorry, we stopped at 8 p.m. so everyone's going to go have dinner. Come back on your own dime again and do it next time.
I mean, that's right. There isn't really a obviously better way to do it. You do want to, we should celebrate the fact that if you want to testify as a member of the public, you can be heard. And you may blend in over a 22-hour hearing. It's hard to stand out. It's hard to say something new and fresh. But, those experiences do, in my impression is they do have an impact on the decision makers. You are unlikely in your brief testimony over a 22-hour hearing to outright change someone's mind. But you make an impression, and that impression matters over the long haul. It's hard for the public to appreciate that's the limited impact that they have, but that's not an unsubstantial impact.
Yeah, that's a lot of information coming in for that those members on that dais there. But at the end of all of that hearing, the House Public Education Committee left the bill pending, did not take a vote. Could you help us understand maybe why the committee would make that move and decide not to take that vote at that time? Again,
it's out of respect for the people of Texas. And so Chairman Brad Buckley, Dr. Buckley, great veterinarian, and he's a gentleman, all these chairs are. So you leave the bill pending because you're providing opportunity for not just that 22-hour period of testimony, but you're allowing people the opportunity to come back even after that day, be heard. They will most likely do, I would assume, I don't know for a fact, a committee substitute. And so they'll take some of that testimony that they heard in those 22 hours. They're also providing that window of the days, today, tomorrow, the next days, for people to also be heard and talk about concerns and shifts and changes that can be made to the bill. They'll have that committee sub drafted, and then in a week or 2, they'll probably they'll have their regular weekly meeting. They'll bring the committee sub up that you'll see where people in that 22-hour hearing were heard. You'll see where people after that 22-hour hearing were continued to be heard and changes were made. Will all the changes those folks that testified want made? No, probably not. But you will see improvements to the bill. So that's why it's left pending. Again, it's to show respect to the greater process and to all those who want to be heard.
Also, nobody would cast a very intelligent vote after 22 hours of round-the-clock hearings.
Yeah, going in at 8 a.m. one day, then leaving at 6:30 the next day.
It's a tough schedule. It's a rigorous calendar.
Yeah.
I want to follow up to say, so both of you are saying, what these folks said, their stories, their experiences really could inform changes to this bill. Is there any insight on changes you could expect to see after listening to some of that testimony?
I think that the House committee is going to make a change probably. There were arguments, millionaires and billionaires could get some of this money to pay for their kids. I think they're going to make some changes. They wanted to start the bill very broad and very inclusive. I think they'll probably make some changes to tighten that up. The reality of it is most of the money is going to go, as the bill is drafted, intended, the money's going to go first priority, special needs, kids like me, dyslexic students who need help. and beyond, ADHD, all the different learning disabilities that we have and I've had in my life and in my family. And then after that, the next prioritization is low income. And so the predominance of this money is going to go to students who are special needs and to families who are low income. And that is who should receive it. And one of the arguments that was made the other day is, well, what about a kid who's already in private school? Well, I don't know why you wouldn't want a parent who has already made the sacrifice for their special needs child and their low income and took them to a private school that they thought was a better educational opportunity for their children's success to be excluded from that opportunity. And that's what I think they're going to clean up.
Mark, any response there? Any other things you expect to see changed?
I hate it. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
I mean, on the policy, let's talk about the policy for a minute. Because, look, at a high level, what we ought to acknowledge is that something like 99% of the testimony was against the bill. There will be modifications that will probably improve the bill on the margins. As a matter of public policy, this isn't the intervention the Texas public education system needs. And to answer the question about why it's objectionable that somebody who's already paying for private school would qualify for the voucher, I don't know a way to have vouchers that doesn't allow that, which is why vouchers is a strategically flawed education intervention. But the reason it's objectionable is because it means that a kid who wasn't receiving education funding from the state now will, which means that the pie is being divided, sliced thinner, which means that our per pupil education spending goes down unless we increase overall education spending. But we already have over $1,000 deficit just per pupil, just to get us back to where we were when Dennis was Speaker of the House in 2019. We have a $4,000 per pupil deficit just to get us to the national average in per pupil expenditures. Now you're going to slice the pie even thinner by spreading it out to the private education that are currently being privately funded as they should. That's one of the strategic flaws in the policy.
Now, before this marathon hearing happened, we also got the Texas Legislative Budget Board putting out a fiscal note on House Bill 3. This, again, would create those education savings accounts. It projected the cost of this school choice program could balloon to almost $5 billion over the next 5 years. How much should we trust those figures? Whenever you file a bill and get that fiscal note back from the Budget Board, how much trust do you put in that?
I think it's hard to trust that number, to be candid.
Why is that?
Because there are too many variables that are going into it. I also think that once some changes are made on income levels and those things, that'll change that number quite possibly. But the reality of it is, and I want to be clear, the Legislative Budget Board does a great job, but it's literally like sitting around with accountants and saying, hey, what if I invested $100 today and invested in Tesla and it did this? They are having to run financial math on a lot of uncertainties. And so that's why I don't trust that number. With that said, the number is how you see the issue. If you are for school choice and empowering parents and giving parents like mine who have a dyslexic kid with very few options in their community, if you believe that parent should have more choice, you don't mind that number because you want every student who's from a special ed, low-income family being served in the most appropriate way their parents see. So I don't know, I'm not saying the number's wrong, I'm just saying it's highly speculative.
Yeah, I understand that perspective too, Mark, but I would imagine that a lot of critics are jumping on this saying that yes, you might be investing $1 billion at this point, but this cost will only get higher and higher over the years ahead.
I mean, I think that's a legitimate criticism of the bill. Of course, future legislatures have the power to rein the spending in by narrowing the scope of the bill. And I agree with Dennis that the bill is likely to be narrowed in scope in the committee substitute, not to mention that it's got to go to the House floor for debate and then it's got to be in a conference committee. The fiscal projections right now are just a projection of a snapshot in time. What the bill finally does, here's I think the underlying question about how much this grows. Are we creating a state entitlement to a voucher that any eligible family can claim that will siphon money away from the public education system? When we have a final version of the bill that defines the eligibility criteria clearly, then we'll know how big a threat it is to the education budget for public schools. I will say this. It is really problematic in a state that is as underinvested in education as we are, with as big a hill to climb as we have, with a low-income population that has educational deficits from the day they walk in the classroom. We're spending 46th in the country per pupil, And if we divert money to private education that families could pay for out of pocket, if we divert money to private education that isn't focused on the special needs students and the low income students that Dennis talks about, if not enough of those students sign up to use the money and the money ends up predominantly going to more affluent families, that's going to be a problematic policy because it's really going to put even more pressure on our public school
But we're also not discussing the House and the Senate both have funding bills to further increase by billions upon billions of dollars for our public education systems. Mark's very good at what he does, and I mean that, and he's talking numbers about other states. I can just tell you, public schools in Texas, which I support, they are not underfunded. They are going to get even more money. They got more money last session. They're going to get even more this session. I can tell you the little private school my boys went to, we went to the public school for them to be tested. And my wife came home and said, oh my gosh, the technology, the resources, everything in that school, I just wish we had it over at the private school. So pleading poverty, I think what we should be pleading is performance. And right now, poverty is not the answer that is plaguing our public schools. I want to be very clear, but more importantly, parents deserve the right. My parents made a choice in 4th grade to drive me into Houston 45 minutes every day so their dyslexic son could get the best possible program. Why would we want to deprive any family of that opportunity?
Okay, so I have 2 dyslexic daughters.
That's right.
We actually moved them early in their education. When we identified them as dyslexic, we moved them into the public schools because the private schools couldn't provide them the same level of service. This notion that private school vouchers are going to save the public schools from having to educate special needs kids with special educational needs is flawed because the private schools don't have to take them. The public schools do. The cost of educating kids in public schools is actually higher than the cost of providing a good education to kids in private schools who come in with the additional support of coming from a family that can pay for a private education. So what's left behind in the public education system is the more challenging kids to educate. The cost per pupil of educating those kids effectively is higher, but the amount of money that most public schools spend is lower than the amount of money that most private schools spend.
That
per
assumes
pupil.
there's not a prioritization on special needs and low income.
That's right. This bill will, how bad a bill this is will turn on how narrowly it's crafted to reach those students.
And again, they're not all going to flood out because there are great public schools in Texas.
Okay, so
parents
let's
just
say
need to
they
choose.
don't.
I want to
think you may
take
be right.
control.
No, look,
And I know
You
we
may
will
do.
continue. I know we will continue to have this conversation. I want
All
to note for our
session,
audience, they did not take a vote on that bill. We're watching and waiting to see when that could come back up. And I know we're going to have you two back on. I
With
hate to
plenty
cut
more
off
to say,
your
yes.
conversation potentially as soon as next week. As you know, these two will be joining us every Thursday to give us context on what's going on at the Capitol.